Midlife is the most important time frame in a woman's life to reduce stress and become more resilient in the face of life's inevitable roller coaster. How we intervene in our health in midlife sets the stage for the decades to come. Stress can feel overwhelming, make us feel out of control, and challenge us daily. However, if we only think of stress as external, we are missing the mark on all of the internal shifts that have a huge impact on our stress resilience. Through this session, I will share the internal levers that can be adjusted for better taming of our stress, which protects our physiology, our hearts, and our well-being over time. Welcome to Mastering Inner Stress, the midlife opportunity to strengthen the inner resilience to be healthier for the rest of your life. My name is Frankie Leigh Shelton, the co-founder of Her Heart Co., a breakthrough platform for women's health that focuses on midlife intervention for cardiovascular disease prevention. As an owner of Wisdom Medicine, the premier virtual functional medicine clinic for women's health, I've seen firsthand the power of unpacking the underlying causes of internal stress to create more bandwidth for the inevitable ebbs and flows in a woman's life. In this session, we will begin by decoding stress, reviewing the strategies needed for better management. We will then take a deep look into the role of blood sugar regulation and insulin, unmasking some of the key dietary fads that disrupt our health in midlife. Together, we will explore the keys for unlocking a vibrant mind while we explore the influences of our nervous system on the well-being journey. This is all for inner strength. These are tools to live by and to thrive for. So stress can be defined as both internal and external. And I think this is one of the things that often gets missed when we talk about stress, is that we only identify it as stressors outside of ourselves or in the external environment. And we may find ourselves feeling that we always have to be responding to the stressors that are passing through our day-to-day lives. But stress is actually better defined when we think about it as internal and external. So what's happening internally in our physiology has a huge impact on our stress response, as well as what's happening in our external environment. So when I unpack the internal stressors, we want to think about the 6 main systems of the body that can be under stress. So we can think about that, the hidden stressors in the body, as hormonal, immune response, detoxification, digestion, energy production, and the nervous system itself. So when we peel back those layers of the onion and we look at stress from an internal perspective, we realize that we have so much to care for within our own system, our own bodies, our own health landscape to help us to reduce stress overload. So stress is really something that you can imagine like a bucket, and all of those systems of the body, whether if they're under stress, are filling that bucket. And that's going to impact our ability to then respond appropriately to the external stressors in our environment that we may not have as much control over. So when we start to reframe stress as internal and external, it actually gives us a lot of the power back to how we can actually tame stress. Why this becomes extremely important in midlife, or what some call menopausal transition or perimenopause, is that everything that we do between the age of around 35 to 50 has a huge impact on our hormonal balance. And cortisol, or stress hormones like cortisol, are also changing during this time of life. So we're having a big impact on the hormonal balance because of the things that we're eating, the way that we're moving, the way that we're responding to stress, and the way that we're taking care of our physiology. So we have a huge opportunity in midlife to not only intervene appropriately, but also to prevent what's going to happen in the next 40% of our life. So when we think about perimenopause and this time of our reproductive hormonal decline, that our estrogen, our progesterone, our testosterone are actually decreasing, even starting as early as the age of 35. We also have our thyroid hormones, which are a big role in our energy, our metabolism, our brain fog, or our cognitive function also begin to decrease and decline during this time of life. So what we think about is a three-legged stool. If we think of our hormonal centers of the body, we're looking at thyroid health, reproductive health, and adrenal health. So if in midlife we are experiencing a decline in both thyroid function, thyroid output, reproductive function, reproductive hormonal output, we are actually making it unstable, those two legs of the stool. We actually only have one leg left of that three-legged stool. That's our adrenal center. So we're actually leaning and depending so much more on our adrenal strength and fortitude during midlife because of the decline of our thyroid and our reproductive hormones. Now, what that means is that if we're asking more of our adrenals, it's really important for us to understand our adrenals, understand how to work with them, how to work with mitigating stress in midlife, because we are asking a lot more from them. So the adrenal glands put out two major hormones, cortisol and DHEA. Cortisol is actually what we think of as, and sometimes gets a bad rap, of being a dangerous hormone or a hormone that we want to steer clear of, but we actually really need cortisol. Cortisol is an energizing hormone. It actually is what helps us to wake up in the morning. It's actually what helps us to have good energy and good cognitive function first thing in the day. It's what gives us the energy to exercise and to get out and do the things that we want to do. I always like to think of hormones as being how we show up in the world, and cortisol is a big part of how we show up in the world. It is also catabolic in nature. So catabolic hormones break down our tissues and cells over time. They actually do have this catabolic side to them, but that doesn't mean that they're all catabolic. They have benefit as well. And when they work in tandem together, most hormones have a pair or a partner, and cortisol's partner is DHEA. DHEA is another very important hormone that's produced by the adrenal glands, and it is anabolic in nature, meaning that it builds us up, it regenerates, it replenishes. I like to think of DHEA, if I could characterize it, it would be like a little sweeper or a broom coming behind cortisol to clean up cortisol's catabolic effect. So when we see cortisol and DHEA working together in harmony, we actually see cortisol providing energy, and we see DHEA coming in to make sure that there isn't any damage done by cortisol over time. What tends to happen is that when these are working in harmony, we feel like we can do anything. We feel like we can take on the world. We feel like we can juggle so many things at once. We can have our career. We can have our kids. We can have all of our to-do lists. We can take care of our parents. We can do all the things. And we can do that for a while. That is actually something that becomes the superpower of using adrenals well. But over time, we start to drain that DHEA. We actually start to see that sweeper, that cleanupper that comes behind cortisol actually gets tired. That tank gets lower over time. And that DHEA starts to decline. And what happens at that point is cortisol starts to run the show. It doesn't have its helper, its hormonal helper there to clean up the mess. And that's when cortisol becomes more catabolic. That's when cortisol is really in charge of running that stress show, flooding the body with stress hormones that we need to be really careful of. Over time, if we continue to let cortisol run the show, it too will run its tank out. And that's when we start to hear things like adrenal fatigue or cortisol decline to a place where we don't have those energizing benefits of cortisol left anymore. And this is really the picture of what tends to happen for women in midlife, is that we have hit that point where we've done all the things. We've used that harmony between DHEA and cortisol to the maximum capacity. And then we start to see that decline of DHEA, cortisol running the show. And if we don't catch it and intervene at this time and really start to create lifestyle and behavior habits to bring that harmony back into focus, then we have this potential of that catabolic nature of cortisol taking over. When we think about adrenal fatigue, we want to make sure that we realize that cortisol has a history. There's a story to what's happened with cortisol, that we didn't just arrive at adrenal fatigue. And that when some doctors, endocrinologists, specialists may speak to that adrenal fatigue is only there when there's a clear diagnosis of something like Addison's disease. This plays into the importance of how the conventional medical system is really designed around diagnosis, that you have to check all of these boxes in order to get a diagnosis. And then only at that point do we give a intervention. And the reason that we want to think about the story and the history and the timeline of cortisol and where we are in that imbalance or balance is that there's a lot that comes before that diagnosis. There's a lot of people that will experience cortisol fluctuation, cortisol decline, cortisol stress and strain on the body prior to ever getting a diagnosis, or may never even get that full-blown diagnosis. But what we want to do is we want to intervene prior to there ever being a diagnosis. We want to intervene prior to adrenal fatigue even being an issue. We want to say that there's so much that we can do to rebalance and help to work with cortisol so that we never get to that point in the first place. So what we're going to talk about is the importance of working with cortisol and balancing hormonal response to stress through some key interventions that we can do in our day-to-day life. And one of the things that we want to make sure to be aware of is that there's a lot of potions and supplements and things out there that are touted as being these magical solutions for balancing hormones. But really, when we take control over our stress response, we're taking control over things that we're doing in terms of our nutritional approach to cortisol balancing, our breathing approaches to cortisol balancing, and we actually begin to have a conversation with our own nervous system and our own digestive system in a way that doesn't give our power away to outside magic pills and solutions, but actually brings it into something that we can do in our day-to-day life. And that's a very different approach to hormonal balancing than looking outside of ourselves to say, what is that thing that's going to fix this for me? We actually have what we need inside of us to do a large majority of the hormonal balancing and intervention that needs to be done in midlife.